All right, for our final conversation with video in the series, we're going to talk to Oliver Benning. Oliver is a former student in the Intro to Quantitative Consulting class. He's also taken a few other courses with me. How you doing, Oliver?
Doing good.
You're one of the only ones, in fact, who has actually managed to go from being a student to being a consultant in practice. Now, it's not clear to me whether you were a consultant before you took the course or after you took the course. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about why you made the jump and how you went about doing that?
Yeah, so my first contract would technically have been about a couple semesters before I took that course. The main reason that I started doing it was just as a kind of flexible way to earn income while I'm studying. So I figured that, instead of finding a job, I could just do contracts, which gave me flexible hours and let me kind of, do those in evenings and around my coursework.
Have you been doing a lot of the contracts as in parallel with your studies?
Yeah, I mainly had just a couple larger contracts that I did kind of over the course of my studies. So, but they pretty much ran through my last 2 years.
I don't know if you've experienced the same thing. I remember when I started off, and of course at the time I thought my approach was to take anything that was thrown my way, and I found that I learned an awful lot, like in the dans le feu de l'action. I don't know how to say this in English, but in the spur of the moment where you have to learn on the fly. On the fly is what I meant to say. If you look back at what you were like as a consultant, say 2 years ago, or even a year and a half ago, are you seeing a lot of differences? Are there moments where you wish you could go back in time and sort of smack yourself over the head and say, oh, why did I do this the way I did it? I should have done it differently. Is this something that you've experienced?
Generally, I'm pretty satisfied with how I did things. I was pretty thoughtful in what I took on and kind of very careful about that. There's a couple times when I pulled in a favor for like a friend or like a family member to like do their websites, do this or that. And those ones, it's not that I regretted it, but that's just something I wouldn't recommend doing because, oftentimes those people, you'll definitely give them a good deal and that kind of stuff. I always recommend just finding people that are serious about doing, getting good work and paying appropriate for it. And I was lucky enough to find, a really good client for my first contract and kind of for my second one as well. So I guess I kind of got lucky and didn't do anything that I would really regret.
Well, yeah. So obviously, luck goes a long way, but not screwing it up also goes a long way. It's the best way to make sure that you get repeat customers. Can you tell us a little bit about your first projects? Like, are you able to share some of the details and some of the ups and downs in the process?
Yeah, my major kind of project during like second and third year was to do a medical questionnaire front end for a doctor client. So basically, the idea was that this was a researcher over at Western University who had research funds and had a project on triaging patients for like clinic waiting rooms. He wanted to take his algorithm for essentially taking the feedback of a patient and determining whether or not they should go to the ICU, they should do this, they should do that, whether they should be at the ER or not, or if they should go home. And he wanted to turn that into an interactive questionnaire. So essentially the project was to basically work with him, take his research and actually turn that into an application that somebody could use, within like a web browser to actually declare their symptoms and do all that kind of stuff. So that was basically the project. It was completed over about the course of a year, and during my studies, and all in all, I saw that went through from start to finish, and it had a lot to it.
Have you had a chance to talk to the client since, or do you have any idea if they're using the product you built for them, or if they asked you for modifications or changes?
Yeah, that's one of those where for the first while I was doing a little bit of maintenance for that on the side, and then kind of the client went dark on that. So I don't know what's happened since. I'm not sure up to this day where that's at, but there was a little bit of back and forth afterwards, and then that kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, they're like relationships in a sense, right? I mean, it is a relationship between a client and the consultant, but they're like romantic relationships. At some point, things end, and I don't actually know what my ex-partners are up to a certain point, because that's the life cycle of a consulting project. That it is not forever. I mean, there's meant to be a finite amount of time you spend on these things, at least if you work on these contracts with a finite period of work. So that's not unexpected. Typically, as long as they've paid you, and if they go dark afterwards, it's not a big deal, because it means that they don't have any issues really with what you've produced. If they have a problem with what you've produced, you know that they're going to be coming back to you and trying to get you to change the things that they don't like. So I mean, it might be off-putting at first to get clients that disappear or vanish in thin air, but that's not necessarily a bad sign. At the time, were you working as Oliver Benning, or were you working as a consulting company? Did you have a consulting identity or a consulting brand?
Yeah, I basically realized that the easiest way to get contracts is to set yourself up as a corporation, because it makes it incredibly easy for customers to bill you. So for instance, in this specific example, it's an advantage to be a corporation when you work with a medical client, because if they were to hire me as a part-time employee, I would have to get all kinds of medical tests, just because that's what every single employee that they hire needs to do. Whereas if they hire a corporation, it bypasses all of that. So in general, having a corporation identity is very, very flexible, and I would highly recommend that. And in creating that, I chose a name, so I just chose kind of a flashy name to brand myself under.
How difficult did you find the process of applying or creating this corporate identity? I mean, I know
really easy.
Yeah, I mean, in Quebec, it's a little bit more complicated, because everything is a little bit more complicated in Quebec. But in Ontario, which I believe is where you set this up, I believe it's fairly straightforward to do so, right?
Yeah, you can basically pay an online service about $50 and get that done within a week.
Another thing you and I have talked about in the past, and you did work on a project that Data Action Lab sort of sent your way at some point. And one thing you had mentioned is that, oh look, this is happening during class, but one of the things that my colleague and I were worried about is that you might not have enough time to do everything in the amount of time that you were allotted. And I know you'd reminded us, at least you told us, that you had contacts or access to people in your network. In this case, it was about learning SaaS and then being able to sort of run it. So you have a network of contacts, people you can draw from in case you encounter something that you cannot do yourself. Do you often find yourself using these contacts, or is it just something you keep there as a safety net?
No, for sure. So for instance, as an example for that first, the symptom check project I was referring to earlier, near the end there, I was getting pretty busy, and I had to delegate some of the more front-end graphical work to one of my colleagues who is much better at that than me. So it actually made a lot of sense. So yeah, at the end there, I was subcontracting, portions of that work over to my colleague, and kind of teamed up on the end there. And it was an incredible decision, because he was more specialized, so he could do that work faster, and it took a weight off my shoulder and let me finish the project, realistically and on time.
Yeah, you may end up doing most of the work in your projects yourself, but knowing that you can count on people to spread the load, so to speak, or spread the weight, so to speak, at various times, I have found that to be useful in the past. My tendency is to work alone, period, and to not actually delegate. But once you get past a certain point and you have too many projects, that doesn't make sense anymore. And as you get older, and most of you, the students, or you, Oliver, you're still young, you're still fresh, you still have a lot of enthusiasm and energy. But as you do get older, you'll get kids, and a number of other things happen. You find yourself having less and less mental energy to take on so many projects at once, and it becomes substantially easier then to work on these projects if there's somebody with whom you work, somebody with whom you can bounce ideas or share ideas. And at least that's what I've I've experienced. I mean, I feel that I'm on the downside of my consulting careers. Like I've done, I don't know, about 40 projects so far, and I can definitely sense a difference between what it was like in the last, 10 years and what it's been like for the last 2 years or so. So it's a young person's game in a sense as well, which isn't to say that you can't do it as an older person, but your value there might be more in terms of, well, here's all the things that I've seen before, and here's all the ways in which this can play out, because I've seen many of these things playing out. But as a young person, having the energy to work on a lot of projects and having access to a bunch of other people that have a different set of specialties than the ones you have is a pretty useful, it's a pretty good combo to have. At least that's what I've experienced, and that's what I've seen in you and a few other people as well. Is there anything you found intimidating or less obvious about consulting compared to your studies? I'm asking you this specifically because amongst all the students that I've taught, you might be one of the rare or few only ones where your strength isn't just on the quantitative side. You also have a technical specialty. I mean, you come from a computer engineering science background, and you have the technical, mathematical, quantitative skill sets, obviously, but you also have the technological chops. I mean, if I was talking to somebody who has a pure math background, I would ask them this question. I would expect them to tell me, yes, it's difficult to, or at least it's scary to think about setting up, the back end, front end, so that we have a database to query. Because for us, that kind of stuff is more difficult. For you, I suspect that this isn't really going to be the issue. Like in the class project that we worked together, you were the person who was basically in charge of the infrastructure, the data architecture, everything that had to do with, like, let's call it data engineering for lack of a better word, and you had no real issues with this. Is there anything that you do find less obvious, more difficult, that you might be a little bit scared about tackling?
Sure. First, from a technical side, as I mentioned, subcontracting my colleague there for the visual aspect of things was in my benefit, because I'm not as good at making a page look nice and that kind of stuff. I'm more of a functional guy. So while I can do, the architecture of a system and all that kind of stuff, I do recognize that there's a lot of people out there that are much better at the visual aspect of things. So I try to identify my weaknesses, so I actually know kind of what strengths to look for in colleagues in order to have them on hand to kind of cover gaps. And then from a non-technical side, in consulting in general, what's intimidating is that it's not that you don't have support, but you're essentially really doing things alone, where you're doing the entire interaction with the client. You need to plan the entire project, every single deliverable. I mean, you are really representing yourself as a corporation at that point, which means you're delivering on every single aspect of the relationship, which can be very intimidating at first. But I would say from experience that most clients are reasonable people and willing to work with you. So as long as you have a good client, it's not that bad.
And you have some choice as to who your clients are going to be, because you get to decide whether you enter the relationship or not. But sometimes, just as in normal relationships, like, red flags should have been recognized as red flags, and we don't always recognize them as such. You're still fairly young, or you're early in your path. I mean, recognizing what your weaknesses are, like knowing what you're about, is good if it helps you sort of fill in the holes. You can bring in somebody else from the outside, but you still have the energy, presumably, to say, hey, I'm not so good at this. Whenever I can carve some time, I can try to sort of improve my, visualization aspects, or whatever it is that it is. That's the challenge for a young consultant. You've talked about some of the non-technical aspects. I mean, I know one of the things that I find, I don't want to say surprising, but you do get a lot of requests as a problem. I'm not talking in this course per se, but just in general, about getting extensions for the assignments and getting extensions for the midterm, or can I get a second shot at the midterm? I know that in the consulting world, and in a regular sort of day-to-day work world, these extensions don't really exist, right? If you sign a contract and the deliverable is, you're supposed to deliver this for that specific date, I mean, things happen. COVID last year screwed up a lot of plans. I mean, it's in the contracts, we would have called this an act of God in a sense, and it means that, a lot of the expectations about timelines and deadlines are out the window. But in a general setting, and we're getting closer and closer to that now that we've sort of learned how to deal with the reality of working from home and doing these things, not delivering the product that you've agreed to deliver on time is liable to get you, well, not paid or sued. And so it's a pretty important non-technical thing to get over. Not getting sued is, of course, a good thing. Nobody wants to get sued. If you do get sued, however, you're supposed to, to have your insurance and to have, potentially a lawyer on call. Are these some of the services that you've already prepared, or you're feeling that it's a little too early to really get involved with insurances and lawyers and what have you?
Yeah, I've never dealt with insurance. I've never actually looked into that really as a concept. The closest kind of legal thing I've done is I've had a contract reviewed by a lawyer, which turned out to be a pretty good thing to do. Depending on who you go to, it's not cheap, but it's not that expensive, a couple $100, and it's often a very thorough review of the contract, and it really gives you a lot of information about what you're entering into. And there's a lot of more negotiating room when you're dealing with a client directly, as opposed to, if you're getting a contract from a big company where they would just kind of pass on you if you were to change things. So from a contracting point of view, I would definitely recommend having a lawyer take a look at a contract, as long as it's large enough. And if it's small enough, there probably shouldn't be much in the contract anyways.
I mean, if you've contracted with the public service as well, and you know that they have these sort of basic templates. And with the public service, it is difficult to negotiate, at least with the federal government, difficult to negotiate clauses in the contract. It really depends on how much do they need you, and if they need you specifically, and if they need you right now, then you hold most of the cards. It's tempting to try to get the best possible terms in a contract at all times, but there's also the idea that if the client feels that you're trying to win one over them in the first stages of working with them, they might not be interested in extending contracts down the road. Now, perhaps that's not what you want, but in instances where you have potentially a good client, a good project, working too hard on getting the best terms from the get-go might actually hamper or even destroy the working relationship that you try to establish with the client. So that's something to be on the lookout for. I know I had insurance when I started doing this. I had insurance. We had gotten a pretty big contract from a provincial group in Ontario, and it was a project which was in the news, and there was a fair amount of fear that if something was to happen, if we dropped the ball for whatever reason, then this might come back to haunt us. So at the time, I was very keen on being insured, and I kept it up for a few years, and then I realized that the kind of projects that I get into are not likely to be the kinds of projects where I have to worry about being sued. In many instances, I wait until the project is done to invoice the client, and so in a worst case scenario, if I'm unable to complete the work, it's not like I have to give them back the money because I've waited until the end of the contract to invoice. Now, that's something you can do when you have enough contracts on the go, enough projects on the go, that cash flow isn't a problem. But if cash flow is a problem, then you probably want to set up a system where you get paid monthly or bi-weekly or whatever, however you want to set that up, in which case, and then perhaps it's important to have insurance and to really look at what the consequences would be case the ball does get dropped. Would you say you've had a good go of consulting? It's been what, about a year and a half, 2 years now. I mean, has it been good enough for you that you can you see yourself continuing to do consulting as you advance through your schooling?
Yeah, it's been great for what it is so far. It's been a great way to kind of have work, but still be able to kind of pursue other things along with that. So I've benefited a lot from the flexibility of it. Whether or not I would do it full time is something that I still don't know about for sure. But in terms of during school, yeah, it's been great so far, and it's definitely something that I'll always keep as an option, just to keep myself busy and make sure I'm maximizing use of my time. I'm someone that does like to stay very busy, so I understand that's not for everybody, but if you are someone like that, it's a great way to kind of, have things to do in the evening to stay productive and kind of earn some more on the side. So
I've experienced something like that as well. Of course, when you have kids, you're busy no matter what. So perhaps you don't need to worry about artificially keeping yourself busy. Is there anything you'd like to say to the students of the course before you sign off?
Yeah, just school is a great place for contacts. That's pretty much where I've directly or indirectly made all of my consulting connections, all my best colleagues and peers. So yeah, just make the most of it.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Oliver. I appreciate you taking the time to share some of your experience with the students and with future students whenever they do take the course. And we hope that both your studies and your consulting endeavors will stay clean and pleasant for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Patrick.